I became executive director of Amnesty International in mid 81, 1981. And I just come back after 4.5 years, wonderful years in Peace Corps, Lesotho, where I had learned about southern South African politics, especially apartheid, and sort of a layman's degree in southern politics, southern African politics. It was on fire at the time. And one of the first things that the Reagan administration did was they exported to South Africa, the apartheid state, 2,400 shock batons. And this was called into question. The Secretary of State, I think it's Abrams, trying to cover up for it or get rid of it or not let it be known or whatever. And so I heard about this, and I went actually to the factory where they made these shock batons in Florida to examine why would they send a cattle prod to South Africa. Cattle prod burns against the cow like in two ways, just like burns it. Whereas this weapon that they decided to make at Florida, shock batons they sent to South Africa, would come against the skin, and your arm would come back and come back and come back if they kept it on. So you wouldn't be able to hold to the baton; it'll push you away. So I went to California, LA next. I went in to see the chief of police, Daryl Gates, in Los Angeles, who is renowned for all kinds of problems. Let's say some of them good, some of them bad. And if I remember correctly, he came through the roof on a helicopter, kind of a landing. And I told him he had so many bodyguards. I told him I'm nonviolent, sir. I just had to say that to him. I asked him why he didn't buy these shock batons from this guy in Florida that were sent to South Africa. He said, I'd never do that. He said, my police would hold someone's head against a car and just use that baton to boom, 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 to bounce that head against the car. And, just push the person around, the citizen around. I don't want that to happen to my police force. So I thought, well, we wouldn't send it to Daryl Gates, we sent it to South Africa. So it kind of enraged me about um, the Reagan administration that have the temerity to do that. And I think in some ways it set me in a direction of movement, of paper chain, moving paper around Washington, D.C., not too important. It's when there's a policy change that occurs when we come out against apartheid, or shift our support in support of a country or whatever. That's what you want. You want to shift. And one of those shifts that began for me at the campaign desk of Amnesty International was my first, I think, international leader to come to the United States in my time as executive director, I think it was Marcos. And in the Marcos team, the lead guy who was setting everything up for Marcos to come was a pretty corrupt guy and a lot of torture. And there's a report by Amnesty, a good one on the Philippines, and it it really was one of those times when I asked the staff at a staff meeting, well, what's our campaign? How much is the budget? They said, we don't have any budget for that. And so I thought, well, how do we campaign if we don't have any money? And so I decided that what we could do is take the report and get someone in LA to hand deliver the report to Marcos as he came off the plane. And sure enough, it worked. The Mayor San Francisco, not Los Angeles, and she was Mayor Feinstein was then the mayor of San Francisco. So she met Marcos coming off the plane, and she handed him the report from Amnesty International about torture in the Philippines. And I thought that was a pretty good start to my career at Amnesty International. Also in the Reagan period, you have to sort of be that old to understand it, but Southern Africa was on fire with human rights abuses. They were still battling the apartheid, both in South Africa as well as Zimbabwe and Namibia. They weren't named Namibia yet or Zimbabwe yet, but was Rhodesia in Southwest Africa or something. I forget what they called it. And this struggle for decency in Central America was coming apart completely. There, eventually, in my period at Amnesty during the Reagan years, there was over 300,000 citizens killed in those two little countries. It was a massive number. So the world was on fire, not only in Southern Africa, it also was in Central America. And there was two fighting wars. And then Reagan eventually supported the Contras, which is another fighting force that was terrible bunch of people. Um, and it just was a time the USSR was still the USSR, and all they do is put people in jail for anybody speaking up for opinion. But I think, in a certain sense, as I looked out on the world as a new director at Amnesty, the world was on fire about human rights and human rights violations, and so I started thinking about a movement, more and more of a movement than paper and pamphlets and, the normal stuff that we do in centralized bodies to move information around. And I started to make the difference between aspiration and debasement. And most of the reports of Amnesty International or other human rights groups in the world, UN, the United States, Lawyers Committee, Human Rights Now, Human Rights in New York, um, that the power of degradation is talked about more than the power of aspiration. So that's when I start thinking about doing things like art, dance, movies, videos. I start thinking that's what should start happening. At the same time, CNN was coming online, which meant the world was going to change in terms of the speed of delivery of information. And so this was the time in which I was the director, but taking on Ronald Reagan, who was a very popular president. He was seen as the happy dude, I guess, who brought happiness. It wasn't my world, but seemed to be in other people's world. And so I think in some ways the Central America was more of an issue in the United States at that time because of the superstars who had come out in favor, like Jackson Brown did an awful lot about Central America and Nicaragua. Really good work. And the sense I got, I not only there's a movement needed out there, but I needed in some ways to listen to Pharaoh Gary, who told me you got to lower the pain level of the world. And I thought if we could get rid of apartheid, cool down Central America and Latin America, and then see what we can do about those walls around Russia, that would be a great agenda for me. It's awfully visionary, but it was a pretty good job at a pretty good time. So that was my beginning at Amnesty International.